What's the best "you have no power here" moment you've ever witnessed? I got pulled into a room by a manager who had just had me assigned to her. I've been working here 10 years and know the rules. She's been there for a year. She signs my timesheets and so pulls me into a room and starts telling me she's not comfortable with me starting work at 6:30 a.m. and leaving by 2:30 p.m. to get my small children from school. She argues that it's bad optics and that yes, it's not fair for working mothers, but she prefers I work more regular hours, noting 95% of my job is writing reports and assessing planning applications, and she thinks I should get a babysitter for after-school pickups. I tell her that policy says that my work hours can be between 6 and 6, flexible workplace legislation, and that her preference for when I work doesn't overwrite company policy. I've worked this way for the last 5 years. I told her that if she wants, she can put that in writing and I'll take her email to HR to discuss how it aligns with the policy. It was the last time. She told me when I'm allowed to work. Story 2. My dad is a grade A hole. A few summers ago, my grandparents were being rude to my younger brother and sister. They wanted to go to the sandbar party on the 4th of July because they were mid-20s kids. When I reminded my grandparents they're adults who can do what they want, and I would even transport them sober, my dad stepped in and said, "I better watch how I speak." I said, "Or what? Are you going to ground me? I'm 32 with my own money, car, and home." I'll never forget the way he just stared at me. All the things he held over my head when I was younger were gone. Story 3. When I was about 10, my parents sent me to summer camp for a month. I'd been before, and it had been fun, but this year was awful. The counselor was abusive, and I was writing home every day complaining about how horrible she was. Eventually, I created such a stink that my parents were calling, demanding to know what was going on, and I was demanding to talk to them on the phone. They set up a time for me to come to their administrative office to make a phone call. Well, I get there and some random-ass secretary tells me I can't make the call until I sign some piece of paper basically saying that all the problems in the cabin are my fault somehow. I just looked at her and said, "I'm not signing that. Give me the phone." And then once I called my parents, the first thing I said was, "You won't believe what these people tried to make me sign." Yeah, the camp was in deep crap for trying to make a minor sign some bullcrap CIA form, in addition to the abusive counselor. To this day, I'm surprised and proud of myself for not taking any of their crap and calling their bluff as a 10-year-old. Story 4. I work in a school doing finance, and a few years back we received a water bill for 14 KTA. With it was a letter that said their engineer had taken the reading, so it was an actual, not estimated charge. I did a bit of homework before calling them to dispute it. The lady on the phone insisted that it was a valid charge and had to be paid. I forget my exact words, but I said something like, "I've checked our records and we have no record of you visiting. So either you're not telling the truth or you allowed your engineer to wander around a site full of children unaccompanied. In which case, I want to speak to your manager and the police." We did not pay 14K on Story 5. A VP at some tech company tried to pull the "do you know who I am" card when a teenage Starbucks barista told him they were out of oat milk. And she just stared at him and said, "Yeah, you're the guy who's about to get regular milk or leave." Story 6. This was more of an "I have no power here, but I will duck this company's selective rules." Worked at big department store at a high-end makeup brand counter. They were very strict with the return rules unless the customer was in whole, and then they would give the customer whatever they wanted. I felt like it rewarded bad behavior and made me look stupid for saying no. So I started telling my customers who asked for things outside of the rules that I couldn't process their request, but if I call over a manager, they can. If a company has rules that only apply to nice people, then I say duck that company. Story 7. 2 for the price of 1. When I was much younger, I managed a bottle shop, liquor store off license for our US-UK readers that was part of a much larger retail chain. I was unloading a delivery in the back when I heard a huge commotion at the register, so I ambled out to see what was happening. Upon getting to the front of the store, I see one of my team members copying an absolute spray from some old bloke who's going on about how immigrants are taking Australian jobs and how he's going to have him sacked. The guy working the register was Nepalese. Once the codger had gotten it all out, my cashier told him to please leave the store, as we wouldn't be serving him after the torrent of abuse. The old bloke turns to look at me and says, "Are you going to let him do that?" I replied, "No," and the customer's face lit up. Unfortunately for him, I continued, "I think that he didn't go far enough, so we're banning you from the store." After a second torrent of abuse, he threatened to call corporate, etc., and eventually left after I threatened to call the cops. The next morning, I get a furious call from the district manager insisting that I unban this. I told her that company policies that any racial vilification results in a ban from the store, and if she wants to take it up with her boss, she's welcome to, but I'm looking forward to seeing how she justifies the customer's behavior, which was all caught on tape. She hung up on me, and it was never mentioned again. Story 8. Not from me, but stories I've heard from my parents. They live in an older, fairly affluent neighborhood. The neighborhood itself was built over 15-20 years and started when there was nothing else out there but a dirt road and a bunch of trees. But for the last several decades, it's been notorious for having an extremely pushy and litigious HOA with many self-appointed minions who look for any violation they can. There are laws written into the state's constitution specifically because of the shenanigans their HOA has pulled over the years. Funny thing is that my parents' lot, being one of the first lots built out there and for whatever other reasons, is one of a few in the neighborhood that technically aren't part of the neighborhood and is not subject to any of the HOA's deed restrictions. None of the little HOA minions want to accept that. My parents have received letters, phone calls, notes on their front door, and my parents just get to ignore it all. A lot of it stemmed from them doing major renovations on the house and the HOA wanting to have a say in it. There was one self-appointed HOA wannabe who tried to make a big stink about what they were doing. He eventually moved away. And even with it all, my parents took the high road the entire time and never retaliated or made a fuss. They just ignored it, water off their backs. Story 9. After a really bad injury, I was in a nursing home for rehab. I did PT and OT 5 days a week. If I needed speech therapy, I could do that too. One day, they decide that if you have Medicaid as your insurance, your therapies will be reduced to 3 times a week. But that's PT or OT, ST combined. The other private insurances, BCBs, Medica, etc., would have no change. So, say someone had 5 days a week for PT, OT, and Saint, that is 15 sessions a week between them. The change would have made it for 3 sessions a week between them. If they wanted to make this change, they'd have to do it for all insurances and not just Medicaid because it's discriminatory. My physical therapist came and told me right away that day because she knew I wouldn't stand for it. I went to the director and told her what she is doing is illegal, and she admitted that the company that oversees that nursing home did it for financial reasons. I told her I was going to be calling the ombudsman for nursing homes and Medicaid to report them. She didn't even know what an ombudsman was, which she should know, working as an admin at a nursing home. For those that don't know, it's basically someone who advocates for you if you're in a nursing home or hospital. I followed through with that, and by the end of the day, they reversed the decision, and everyone could have the therapies they need and deserve. If I heard this and didn't have Medicaid, I'd still call and advocate for others because this crap is just sickening. Story 10. I went back to school in my 40s, mainly to get certified for work I was already doing. In the labs, I wear my old shop coat. The labs are all using CNC mills, manual lathes, etc., messy stuff. A manager from the college's finance department sees me working away on my project and proceeds to berate me for daring to show up for work in such a ratty uniform. She's not the first one to confuse me for a professor, so I keep on trying to tell her I don't work at the college. Somehow, this makes her angrier, so she threatens to have me fired for not wearing my staff ID on a lanyard. She's one of those people who never scream. She just gets very precise with her diction. About this time, the head of the department walks in and hears the tail end of her rant. So he digs something out of his briefcase, hands it to me, and says, "Here, I marked your exam. You got a 93%. Would you mind tutoring someone for me?" That's when it sinks in that I'm a student, not a teacher. Story 11, I joined a personal training department as a trainer, right as the gym had acquired it from a company they were contracting out to. So when I started, they were pretty free with any rules for what we had to do or could do. After a couple months, I was one of the more booked up and requested trainers. I created my own workout sheets and gave clients homework for when they didn't have sessions with me, and overall had a pretty well-developed system people loved. Then they started making up random rules, like that we needed to tuck our shirts in. Every single client was like, "That just looks silly, why would you do that?" One day, the manager called me into his office to give me a breakdown on further things he wanted me to do and scold me for not tucking my shirt in. I let him talk, opened my binder, and said, "All right, I'll do that for the next 2 weeks," and handed him my 2-week notice. I'd already been poaching more than half my clients to cancel their memberships and leave with me to do my own training. There were no rules that said I couldn't. He tried to give me "but how are you going to pay bills if you quit?" grilling, and I just laughed and said, "I don't actually even need this job. I just have fun doing it." Story 12. I guess I wasn't the witness, but the one delivering the news. I bartended at a dive in the outskirt of a larger town that happened to be seated on the border of 3 rural counties. It was packed for Sunday football. A large group comes in. They're country. No big deal. I love country folks. They get their first round of drinks when a nervous soccer mom walked up to inform me that the gentleman sitting in the middle of the large group had a gun holstered. We do have a no gun sign on the front door, so covered there. When I walked over to assess the situation to see that he not only had a gun on his hip, but also a beer in his hand, I informed him that the gun had to go. Wasn't even kicking him out at this point, just the firearm. That's when he informed me that it's okay. He's a cop from the next podunk town over. My response? So not only are you out of your jurisdiction, but you're knowingly breaking the law. GTFO. I can't stand the rules for thee, but not for me. BS, I apologize in advance because I know the formatting is going to be crap. Story 13. I worked at Best Buy a million years ago. One night, we had a little get-together at a house. Somehow, the whole supervisor got invited or found out about it. He was a guy in his mid-30s, lived with his parents, and retail was as far as he'd ever go in life. He was a bully at work, rude, condescending, and constantly hit on teenage girls and customers. Anyway, he got into it with one of the guys we worked with, arguing about something stupid, and the supervisor said something along the lines of, "If you keep this up, you'll pay for it tomorrow." The other kid, who was maybe 17 or 18 by the way, stood up and Karen slapped the absolute piss out of the supervisor. Just one massive, loud slap that his grandmother probably felt. The kid yelled, "Who the duck do you think you're talking to? This ain't the store, Karen." It was amazing. He was only there another 2 months, but from what I saw, he kept to himself and, other than required shift meetings, never said a word to anyone. Story 14. I once had a patient threaten to sue me because I placed orders for a nurse to do a nasal swab for COVID plus flu. They claimed I assaulted them and that they'd call their lawyer if I didn't do what they wanted. A lot of pain and anxiety meds. I took their phone from the bedside table and gave it to them and said, "Call them right now, I'd love to talk to them." They were silent for what felt like 10 straight seconds before they grumbled about how they didn't feel like doing it right now. Story 15. My own, and I'm still proud of young me. I had to pick up my little brother from a school dance, and I had walked to the school with the plan of just walking him back safely because we lived right around the corner. Now keep in mind, I'm small, 5 foot nothing, and newly 18 at the time, but my brother was decently taller than me, so I get that would look weird. I walk into the gym to find him, I get him ready to go, and as we're walking out, this teacher, who I knew and hated and even had myself when I was in his grade, with a sour puss face on, grabs my arm a little too hard to stop us from leaving, saying we needed a parent to go home with to leave the dance. She didn't recognize me, I guess. Being freshly 18 and with that whole I'm an adult and can do whatever I want now mentality. I yanked my arm away, and in my best adult voice, read as fully formal and dignified to my young autistic brain that was grown-up speak, I go, "Mrs. D, I'm here to pick up my brother with my parents' full permission. I'm blah, 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 blah. I had you several years ago. You cannot stop me from bringing him home, and don't touch me again. We'll be leaving now." And the dawn of realization in her eyes, knowing who I was, and that she couldn't keep me there, along with her mouth going all lemony, was satisfying as hell. She just huffed and walked away like I was in the wrong. But she was, and she duckin' knew it. It was the first real grown-up interaction I had with an adult outside my family, and I felt like a badass. Story 16. Worked in hotels for over a decade, nearly all of it front-facing, so I've seen the worst of it when it comes to making front staff into the bad guys who say no, while the managers get to come out from behind the desk and give them everything they wanted anyway. Never managed the clinical detachment some were able to develop. I secretly hated every smug-a-hole who walked away with free stuff and then treated me like crap the rest of their stay. Pandemic hits, hotels can't ducking wait to get rid of every last one of us. Ended up begging a job at a hospital off a friend. And, my darlings, I have never felt so utterly delighted as I did when those self-same a-holes tried to have procedures done without the medically required labs beforehand. Understand, these labs were a bit inconvenient. You had to get blood drawn and wait for results for 30, 45. But this type of procedure was uncommon, infrequent, and utterly necessary because not getting the dosing correct would literally kill you. And here were these older folks who thought a young-looking woman could be yelled at until she folded, who sneered at my commonplace job, at the nurses, at probably everyone they'd ever met. They huffed and puffed. They whined and growled, and they snarled and shouted insults. They swore to get me fired for incompetence, or rudeness, or lack of respect. But you know what happened? Either they got the test done, or they left. No one was allowed to skip it. I reveled in the power of being able to tell someone no, and know that no one would or could take it back or change it. The supervisors would back me. The nurses would back me. The director would back me. All the way up. Because skipping those tests would cost the nurse their license, probably shut down the department, and potentially threaten the entire hospital. Best damn no I ever got to say. Story 17, ducked up and long, but it left my wife and daughter in awe. So, my daughter comes to me crying that her friend's dad had hit her and she was running away. So I went and picked her up. She runs out to the car in her socks, crying with the start of a shiner. My instinct was to go even things out, but she insisted she just wanted to get away and let him cool down. She was a foster kid, so terrified of going back in the system and being separated from her 2 sisters, so no police. I get her to my house. calmed down, cleaned up, and my wife, with no experience with this kind of crap, says all she can think is how panicked she'd be if one of our girls ran away. So she calls the mom to tell her where the kid is and that she's safe. 5 minutes later, mom is pounding on my door. I give my wife my most aggrieved look and go deal with her. Her. I want my daughter right now. Me. That's not going to happen. Her. I'll call the police. Excellent idea. I'll explain why she's here, and you can explain why your 200-pound husband felt the need to hit an 80-pound girl. I'd have already called them, but she begged me not to. Her. I'm going to go get my husband. Me. Do that. It'll be a much fairer fight. Her. Maybe they need to calm down. She can stay here a few days. Me. Sounds good. Have a nice night. Come to find out, my wife, daughter, and the friend were eavesdropping and started cheering as soon as she drove off. I thought I was totally calm, but my wife said it was the most menacing thing she'd ever heard. Story 18. My 4th day ever working as a lifeguard at 16, an infant fell out of a chair that was way too big for them and hit her head. I reacted to the mother screaming since they were sitting behind me and I couldn't see them, got everyone out of the pool, and got my manager to call 911. Ambulance was there within 10 minutes. Infant lived. The mother then threatened to sue me for neglecting the responsibilities of my job, saying that I should have warned her against putting her child in a large lounge chair. I responded, so you want to sue me because a 16-year-old kid should be telling a 30-year-old mother how to take care of her kid? She promptly stopped talking. Story 19. My wife and I bought the house I grew up in for my parents. Part of the deal included providing a suite for them to live with us. My dad never got over the fact that this was no longer his house, and our relationship soured a bit. One day, he was demanding that I do something, and I had zero intention of doing it. Not out of spite, but because it's not something I wanted done. I refused. He got into dad mode, fully raised his voice, and demanded it in a way that would have sent me flying into submission when I was younger. I calmly walked close to him and said, "Do you still think I'm ducking scared of you?" He had an obvious moment of realization and walked away. Our relationship was never the same from that moment on. Please understand, this was not a proud moment for me. This was a realization that my childhood hero was really an abusive, a hole with a God complex. Our relationship changed so greatly that I cannot tell you the date or even the year he passed away sometime after this incident. It took a lot of therapy to come to terms with. Story 20. I do construction for a state agency. Our projects are not under the jurisdiction of whatever municipality we are in. Rather, our agency is the authority having jurisdiction. That means we have our own building code program, issue building permits, etc. Certain towns and cities I work in have reputations as having major PETA code enforcement officials. Occasionally, they breeze into my jobs, trying to swing their junks around. And the feeling I get when I shut that crap down and send them packing is quite nice. Story 21. Years ago, our Hoa Prez was replaced by a woman named Karen, who made life in the absolute hell for years. She was a power-hungry, angry woman who slowly filled the board with her friends. It got to the point where she would issue fines for visible gas meters and for just about anything else she wanted. People hated it, but somehow she was always voted in. Then she picked on a lawyer. He had his 38-foot boat parked in the street overnight. It was there from evening to morning. When he came out to move it, there was a note and a fine, and that set him off. He did whatever lawyers do in cases like this, and discovered that Mrs. Pugh was cooking the books and cooking the votes with the help of her fellow board members. There was a tax issue with the Hoa of some kind that had led to a lien. Through some process, he paid that tax and as a result, was able to essentially take control of the Hoa, which he did very publicly during a meeting with the help of a constable. He walked in, announced that the Hoa was changing to a mud with defined conditions or something like that, and that the mud would pay for the pool and clubhouse maintenance, and that was it that. The constable dismissed everyone. Karen had the balls to continue to try to enforce the old Hoa rules. But then, while inspecting houses, she got trapped by angry residents who threatened her bodily, and it all finally stopped. Glorious. Story 22. When I was a newbie medtech, an intern dropped off a pregnancy test in my lab before the dipsticks were available. So I set it with the rest of the pregnancy test samples, waiting for the big batch from the clinic to be efficient. Less than an hour later, intern comes back for the results, and I told him it wasn't done, and would be run with the rest of the routine tests. He got all puffed up and yelled at me, "I marked it stat. I want it done stat. It's on my wife." I was about to remind him of our policy on stat testing when the chief of pathology, who had been sitting in the corner using a special microscope as he occasionally did, unfolded all 6 discs of his Ichabod Crane physique and said, "Dr. McShouty, stat pregnancy test for a mistress, perhaps. For a wife, never. We will call you when the results are available." Dr. McShouty slithered out of my lab. Story 23. Delivering furniture when the customer is unhappy about us not being willing or able to go over their third floor balcony. He name drops the VP of sales to my driver, saying that he knows him very well and talks to him all the time. My driver just folded up the paperwork and said, "Oh yeah, me too." We just got back in the truck and drove away. Story 24. As a non-male person working as the manager in a comic and game store, I did indeed have a misogynistic hole come in who completely disregarded my knowledge because of my perceived gender. I want the lead-up arc to the death of Mulan. Which issue do I start with? Oh, easy, issue X. I believe we have all of the back issues in that arc. If you want, I can... No, you're wrong, that's not it. He proceeds to try to school me on this, being very rude in the process and clearly condescending, and after I continue to calmly reiterate the actual issues to no avail, my male boss finally catches this from afar, comes over and asks, "Everything all right?" Guy explains what he's looking for. My boss says, "Okay, got it. Let me get our comic manager," and leaves out the back of the store. Coming back in a few seconds later, strolling up to the counter beside me and gesturing to me with a, "Here they are. Ask away." I proceeded to give the same answer I'd been giving, and the guy absolutely gobsmacked and sheepishly silent, bought the issues he was looking for, and slipped out the door with his metaphorical tail between his legs. Definitely learned a lesson that day that attitude had no power here. Story 25. People cannot stand that I fish from local waterways in busy parts of town in my city. There are local and very old streams that cut through my very busy city, some going through main neighborhoods, other parts going through main roads, railroads. Even with having all correct gear, correct licenses, and a plethora of information regarding what I'm doing, still I will have confrontation with people. Sometimes people will yell things off the side of a road. Other times they will stop mid-road in a car and yell at me. Generally, the worst are the people walking dogs, or just walking by. If they see not only me, but one of my registered minnow traps out, it will almost always get stolen or pulled, even with my laminated info card, and all the information and diagram of what it is on not only the minnow traps themselves, but also the lines and stakes that they are tied to. I used to think it was teens until I realized it was older people watching me, waiting for me to place a trap, and then quickly running out to steal them and casually throw them away because they didn't like what I was doing. Now, obviously, the police have been called so often they know me by name, and it's sad because they all like me and I've had no problems with them. Generally, they won't even stop when they see it's me. I have a broad knowledge of fish, housing, and taking care of them. I have not only a basic lifetime fishing license, but multiple aquaculture permits. I renew yearly to house my bait fish safely in my state. I know all limits about every species aquatic, and not that could possibly be caught in my environment. I've got zoning and building permits and created my own koi ponds for multiple species of fish and local bait fish, along with multiple indoor and outdoor aquarium. I used to be very nice to people, explain a lot, let them care and hear their side and explain with empathy that I understand they don't like seeing me for whatever reason, but what I'm doing is 110% legal every time, all the time. Now, as I've gotten older, I'm much less nice and much more formal. I keep an updated physical copy of all permits in my wallet, all information regarding what I do online, and laws are pulled up on my phone and ready. When anyone goes from questioning to being rude, I don't even deal with it. Just tell them they are wrong, and if they don't like that, call the police. Again, my local police know I'm a calm, well-informed veteran. They will now shut people down for me for wasting their time. All this being said, 2 summers ago on a side road, not even one of the main roads I fish off of, we had an older couple stop and be very agitated with me. I won't get into specifics, but the guy actually got out of his car and was repeatedly approaching me and my equipment. Police got there, and eventually the couple escalated the situation with the police to the point in which the lady was screaming and crying, spitting and harassing the officers until a second local police car arrived. Over the course of an hour, it went from me calmly explaining what I was doing, to them being talked to by police, to the man getting arrested, to the female then completely freaking out and also getting arrested, and then their old rusted SUV got winched up and towed, and I swear pieces were falling off on the way down the road. I took video of it being hauled away for my friends and significant other to watch. All in all, I was actually worried about possible weird repercussions for a while, but it's been 2 years and nothing. Story 26. My mother's a git. Dad got custody after the divorce at my insistence, but Dad and his mother didn't want to alienate me from my own mother, so they encouraged me to maintain a relationship with her. After I was out in the working world, living in my own apartment, this guide of a mother made a habit of scheduling her vacations and then telling me, not asking, when she would be flying in and staying at my place. This was one of the lesser levels of her obnoxiousness. She also made a habit of dominating social situations. Once, when she announced a visit, I already had a prior commitment. Mentioned it in advance and invited her along to be courteous, with a caution about what the evening would be and a suggestion she might not enjoy it. This bulldozer of a relative insisted on coming anyway. Mother took French in school. She doesn't remember much of it. My second language is German. Started learning it after Dad got custody. There hadn't ever been a reason to speak it in front of her, and she was never curious about my progress. Until we walked in the door of that event, she acted as if my warning had been nonsense. It actually was in German. The dinner conversations were in German. The speakers gave their talks in German. Sometimes people would say a few words in English to her to be polite before turning to resume discussions with others and with me in German. Did my best to include Mom, summarizing translations to keep her up to speed, and even explaining the pun. She smiled. She sat up straight. Her manners were flawless. She was completely pwned. She didn't try to foist herself for another visit until after I moved to a different state. Story 27. Once upon a time, 2017, I got out of the Army and joined the National Guard. Unfortunately, I had a family to provide for, so working 1 weekend a month wasn't going to cut it. I flexed the G bill and went to school. The G bill kept my head just above water. I also worked part-time, did side jobs and gigs. Hustled. At one point, I was working 4 separate jobs in a week. Still maintained a 3.4. Having financial security makes you invincible in the entry-level world. You could tell a lot of the people I worked for were used to working with desperate people they could bully around. I have never told so many people to go fuck themselves in my life. I'll never forget being able to replace the look of self-satisfied smugness with shock and disorientation. As a supervisor, manager, or owner suddenly realizes I am not dependent on his crafty little corner of the world. Not only was I willing to tell them no, they also get to realize I'll walk off and leave them with whatever crapty circumstances they thought I was going to clean up for them. So eventually, my National Guard unit commander rotates out, and he gets replaced with someone who thinks they're going to drop the hammer and make an example out of our unit. An extended training weekend starts, and anyone who fails the physical fitness test doesn't get to go home to rest at night. Welp, I'm gassed from working 4 jobs, doing National Guard, and full-time school. I fail the PT test. They tell me I can't go home. This will not do, and I have an essay due Monday. I walk directly to my locker and quietly do a full inventory of gear and equipment. I deliver this completed list to my team leader and tell him I'm out. Separation paperwork shows up 8 months later from some colonel. I sign it. I draw a giant green junk around my signature. Beknownst to me, this colonel was going through the motions of becoming a general, and suddenly I am banned from being re-recruited in my state. This made me a folk hero. My squad leader had become a recruiter and spread my story far and wide. For the next 6 years, I'm answering phone calls from the recruitment office every 4 months because some new guy heard the story. In order to see the paperwork with the giant junk, I have to agree to let them access my files. The first phone call lasted 45 minutes. The latest phone call lasts 30 seconds. This is rank and title soldier guy with the National Guard. You have my permission to access my files, bro. Good habits pass hard. I didn't stop telling employers to go check themselves for the next 2 years. Present day, I found a manager worth working for, and I did calm down a bit. Story 28. Ironically, it came from someone with a lot of power. I had to go to court over a workplace injury settlement. The place I worked for didn't provide any kind of safety equipment for moving extremely heavy boxes full of product, and I ended up injuring myself trying to move this heavy product to a shelf. The judge who took on the case was notorious for her hatred of big corporations and their treatment of employees, which was awesome for me. The original payout wasn't even going to cover further medical costs, and they didn't give me time to get a lawyer. The hearing was in the same week I had agreed to settle before a judge. The judge had no idea that I had not been given proper notice until the day of the hearing and knew there wasn't a lawyer in the state that would have taken my case without time to review, which was the issue I ran into. The company's attorney tried to bully his way through the hearing, justifying the pathetic payout with bullcrap excuses, and then attempted to blame me for intentionally trying to harm myself to get a payout. The judge, after the umpteenth time she or I was interrupted after trying to ask me questions, just tilted her head towards the other lawyer with the sweetest little smile and called this guy out in the most brutal way without ever changing her very gentle tone. She told him that his excuses were just excuses, and that she found it hard to believe that I would willingly settle for an amount that wouldn't even pay for my next round of pain relief treatments, knowing that I was stuck with this injury for life. It was a herniated disc in my neck, torn trap muscle, and ripped tendon around my shoulder. She then went on to explaining that forcing a representative for the company into the room with me and the doctor not only compromised the care I should have been receiving, but that it likely corrupted diagnostics as I was only going to doctors approved and paid for by the company. It was also highly illegal. Then she said this: I suggest you stop talking before I come up with a number that will force your company to rethink how they treat their employees on a national scale. Lawyer went from overly confident and pushy to fumbling over his words in about 5 seconds. She then looked at me, told me to get a lawyer, and they would reschedule the hearing for a more appropriate date that actually allowed me to get representation and earn proper compensation. We had the same judge for the next hearing, and while the settlement wasn't something that would hurt the company on a national scale, it definitely ended up being a number that made them finally put some proper moving equipment into their stores. Story 29. Completely organic party at an all-student apartment complex. Started off with a couple of neighbors having a few people over, evolved quickly to a DJ setting up on a second-floor balcony, and at least 1,000 people packed into a courtyard and the surrounding parking lot. It was crazy. People were parking a mile away at a shopping center and walking in. A single cop pulled into the middle of the crowd, turned his blue lights on and hit the siren whoop whoop. Almost in unison, 1,000 people yelled whoop whoop, it's the sound of the police, followed by laughter. Cop turned his lights off and eased back out of the parking lot. More police showed up. They set up a roadblock at the exit to the complex and just checked to make sure nobody drunk was trying to drive home. Story 30. A guy marched up and wrote me a violation for leaving my bins out. I smiled and said, cool, but I don't live in your HOA. He sputtered, checked the map on his phone, and walked away in silence. Sweetest curbside victory ever. Story 31. My bio-dad sued me so he could steal my inheritance from my mom. We were in front of the lawyers and he said, fine, I will put you on restriction. I laughed. The lawyers laughed. I was 50 years old. Story 32. Back around 2010-ish, I was a combat medic in the Army assigned to the infantry. After morning sick call, I ended up having to drive one of the soldiers to the base hospital, so I ended up getting back to my line unit, the platoon I normally worked with on training missions. A few hours later than normal, I start walking up to the CP when some new E5 buck sergeant walks up to me and gets in my face screaming about how I was late and I better have a good excuse, but before I could say anything, he screamed at me to drop in the front lean and rest position, the push-up position, and start counting off. Back then I was an E4, so I had to do what he said, so I dropped and started doing push-ups. I got to maybe 20 when the platoon sergeant and the platoon leader walked out, and the sergeant lost his goddamn crap. Who in the mother ducking hell is stupid enough to drop my goddamn doc? Who is the stupid crap stain who thinks he can drop my ducking medic in the middle of a CP like he's some sort of day one private? Get the duck up, doc, and have some water. This is the part where he helped me up and made a hilarious show of doing it and dusting me off. Then he put his hands on my shoulder and was all like, need anything, doc? Need some water, doc? Is your uniform wrinkled, doc? Then he laid back into the sergeant that dropped me. So the thing here was that I had deployed twice before this happened, and I had worked with that particular sergeant for a while. And while I'll be the first to admit I was a crap soldier, I was one hell of a combat medic. Also, not for nothing, medics sort of work outside the normal system, at least in combat units. Unless we duck up in a major way, no one outside of our medic platoon disciplines us like that. The nature of our work is such that we get a lot of slack from most of the leadership because we're seen less as soldiers by them and more like civilians. It helps with stress to have someone around who is sort of like half soldier, half caregiver. And there's very little in the Army at least that pisses off a combat leader than seeing the guy who runs into danger to save a fallen soldier's life get mistreated. Also, medics just naturally tend to end up getting close to both the soldiers and the leaders, because no matter how many people are needed for pretty much any damn thing, even if it's just a sergeant and a driver, the doc always goes with. So we just end up knowing everyone. And even a leader needs a dude he can lean on when crap gets crazy, and because of our position, it's usually the medic. Story 33. I worked F-15s in the USAF. One day, my supervisor and I are walking out of the hangar, and we see our lieutenant with two other LTs taking pictures of the C-17 that's being loaded up for deployment. For anyone who doesn't know, that is a huge no-no. Taking pictures of deployment prep is bad enough, but just having an unauthorized phone on the flight line, let alone taking pictures of it, is also a major violation. Most people have their phones for easy communication, but you keep it on the down low. Taking pictures is still a huge duck-up. There are signs posted at every entrance to the flight line telling you not to do what these kids were doing. So we walk over and confront them. They're officers, so we do it tactfully and politely. Hey, Lieutenant, looks like you guys are taking pictures. You know that's not allowed, right? Do you have permission from public affairs? At which point our LT realizes us his screw-up and immediately apologizes. Then explains to the other two that we're right and it's not allowed. Then I say what has to be done. Well, we have a duty now to check your phones and make sure any pictures of classified information is deleted. Worth noting here that because of a quirk of organization, I, as the lowest ranked person in this conversation, actually had the highest security clearance. So it had to be me to check the phones. At which point the male LT suddenly took issue. Wait, we outrank you guys. I'm not showing you my phone. Get out of here. To which I replied firmly but politely, Sir, with all due respect, this is us being polite. The alternative is we call over that security forces officer, tell him what happened. He points his gun at you, confiscates all three of your phones, and they'll be put through a fancy shredder by the security manager Mesquite. Thomas. Have you met Sergeant Thomas? He loves shredding phones. He says it's the best part of his job. At which point, he realized that getting arrested wouldn't look good for his career, and he handed me his phone. IDFK what he was worried about. It's not like he had junk pics, but he did have a ton of pictures of exactly the kind of stuff that isn't allowed to be photographed, even when photos are permitted. I scolded him a little more, as I showed him the error of his ways, gave him his phone back, and sent them on their way. Next day, I got called into my LTS office. I was mentally prepping to fight for my stripes, but he just apologized for his screw-up and his nonner friends, nonner being a pejorative term for non-flight line, or non-essential personnel. He thanked me for my discretion and not sicking sixfo on them, and that was that. Story 34. I used to work as an exotic dancer, and it was always funny to me how often men assumed that they could come into our work, speak down to us, and get away with it. I could tell these misogynistic dudes felt like because we were in a customer service type job and it had an outwardly vulnerable appearance, we were just an object they could spew their incel ego trip bullcrap at. But what they didn't realize is we have all the power at the club. I could immediately talk crap back. I'm talking completely roast his ass, and then walk over to a bouncer, tell him, that man is harassing me, and get his ass dragged out. The look on their faces when they realized they didn't have any power and immediately ducked up was the most satisfying crap ever. Story 35. I worked at a Dairy Queen. The guy I worked for was kind of cheap, so there were only 3 of us who worked the store that summer. Myself, him, he's the owner, and a woman he was training to run the DQ. She was building a couple states away. She used to work for him, but was moving to be by her family. The woman would work 3 weeks straight, then took a week off to go be with her family. He also owned other DQs in the area, and occasionally had to go deal with them, so I was often left to run the store by myself with the phone number to his wife, who lived 2 minutes away, in case I got slammed and needed help. Because I was entrusted with his store often enough, I was allowed to take on his attitude towards problem customers. GTFO. I was expected to give amazing customer service, but not expected to tolerate abuse from customers. It is relevant to know that I was 18 at the time, so while I had a lot of responsibilities at that store, most customers assumed I was just a ground-level employee. Boss was out, but expected back soon when I had a small line of people one day, but nothing out of the ordinary. Guy comes up and orders a dip cone. No problem. It takes less than a minute. It was like $2 and fee. Guy was somewhat irregular. He gives me a $20. I give him his change and start to turn to the person behind him. You did so good. I'm gonna give you a tip this time, sweetheart, he said. And he proceeded to take the $10 from his change and tuck it down my shirt. I was stunned for a second, then retrieved the bill and threw it back at him and told him, get your Don Johnson wannabe ass out of here and don't come back. He immediately got mad, calling me little girl and threatening my job. I hadn't realized my boss had come in the side door, but this guy saw him and smugly said, there's the man in charge, before telling boss what happened, then smugly looking at me as he expected my consequence to come. Boss looks at us, then says, you're right, she did do something wrong. He picks up the $10 and hands it back to me and says, you deserve that for putting up with this guy. Now get out. And don't bother going to next nearest DQ poo. I own that one too. Story 36. My brother is the fixer for a niche machine that most all serious manufacturing sites have. This machinery is crucial to their operation. My brother would fly to your location same day or next day as time allows. If my brother's coming in, it's because others have tried and failed to fix said machine. He gets called to a very large factory that is at a standstill due to one of these machines being down. He's doing his thing on the machine when the manager calls my brother over to a team meeting they are having on the shop floor. The manager starts berating my brother about stupid stuff and how that machine should be fixed by now, blah blah. My brother walked back to the machine and started packing up his stuff. The manager started freaking out, asking him what he's doing. My brother calmly told him, you don't get to yell at me. I'm leaving. My brother then proceeds to walk out with the manager following him, telling him he can't leave. My brother called his boss expecting to get into trouble, but he said, duck 'em. They need us. We don't need them. Word got up to the higher-ups about why the line was stopped, and that manager was demoted with a serious ass-chewing. After much ass-kissing and promises to not have that happen again, my brother went and fixed their machine the next day. The staff in the factory were telling my brother how awesome that was that he walked out. They said the a-hole manager was freaking out after he left. Priceless. Story 37. I got hit by a minivan going 40-50 km/h when crossing the street and was in the ER. A nurse told me I had torn ligaments in my knee and to try and walk, so I got up and immediately collapsed from pain. She stared at me, told me to stop being dramatic, and I was only acting like that because she told me something was wrong. When I was being wheeled out by her, I told her I was going to puke, and she said to stop being dramatic. It's just the adrenaline wearing off. She moved to the side of the wheelchair where I turned and puked, which was all over her. I felt bad, but it was so satisfying. Story 38. I was only ever told about this secondhand, but there's this fancy work party going on for a company that's like one of the monopolies in the USA. If I name it, a lot of folks will recognize it. Our protagonist is there to inspect the furnace and act, because for reasons unknown to the guy who called for heating AC help, the air conditioning will not turn off. The guy who'd called is a real piece of work. Too, he's incredibly pushy and hovers over our protagonist whenever he can, trying to micromanage a man who doesn't even actually work for him. Well, our protagonist finally figures out the issue. You see, one of the tables with food that was set up for this fancy work party just so happened to be set up directly underneath the thermostat. All the hot steam from the food rose up and made the thermostat think it was freaking boiling inside, so the ace has been on in an effort to cool down what the thermostat thinks is an absolutely sweltering room. This means there's a simple fix. Move the table with food someplace else and let the thermostat calm down. The guy who called our protagonist does not like this. He starts reaming into our protagonist, demanding to be told whether our protagonist thinks he's stupid or not, insisting our protagonist is just being lazy and doesn't want to work. And then, when the VP of the company happens to come over to see what the commotion is about, the angry man turns to him and demands to see our protagonist's company blacklisted for these horrible crimes against him. And the VP just looks at our protagonist, then at the angry man, then back at our protagonist, and then the VP calmly asks our protagonist how his children are doing. Our protagonist smiles and responds, and the two of them start making small talk about the latest NFL game, what their families had been up to, and near the end, promising to pick up their conversation that upcoming Sunday after their pastor's sermon. You see, the VP and our protagonist have known each other for years, which means the VP of this extremely powerful company knew immediately that the angry, micromanaging man was talking entirely out of his ass. I never heard what happened to the angry man and his position in the company after that, but I'm told he was at least quite gobsmacked by the time our protagonist actually left. Story 39. I was a hostess at a high-end steakhouse. We rarely had walk-ins because people usually made reservations. It was myself and this horrible Karen at the stand when a customer ran up to us screaming to call 911. Their friend was having trouble breathing. Karen hostess, who refused to seat people, she'd just stand there and check people in, wait for me to run the table. Anyway, she was on the main phone, so I pulled my cell phone out and called 911. The operator instructed me to get eyes on the patient, so I ran into the main dining room, and they did not look well at all. I followed instructions and ended up having to do CPR when they stopped breathing altogether. I'm talking, he was turning blue. Once EMTs got there, I went back up front, frazzled and filled with adrenaline. Karen hostess immediately had me start seating people, as she couldn't be bothered to have sat one person while I was literally saving someone. Keep in mind, we never get walk-ins, so she could have easily sat a table if they were getting Carini or something. I would have loved a moment to get my bearing. The guy had gone into cardiac arrest. It was scary as hell. She then began to lecture me that I'm gonna have to go to corporate and might be fired for pulling my cell phone out in front of customers and causing a wait. I stood there shocked. She didn't even let the managers know. She literally did absolutely nothing. The guy's friend came up and handed me a hunt thanking me as they all ran out the door. She demanded half of it. Again, dumbfounded by her entire reaction, I stared at her. She kept it up and I said, you know what, I'll call the owner now and tell him myself and call the manager up since she didn't even let them know. Owner came in and lit her a new one, then handed me another $100 right in front of her. Duck you, Janice, you horrible, horrible person. Cherry on top was the friend called later in the evening, requesting my manager to tell them how well I handled the situation, which resulted in more praise in front of that Karen. Then they cut me early, so she had to close muwahaha, and bought me a drink. No one really knew what was going on because each table was a private section and lights were dim. No one could see what was going on. Story 40. I worked at a local gas station pre-COVID. We were also the only place in that tiny town that sold alcohol. Most of the customers were well behaved. They'd come in, get whatever big bottle or case they wanted, go home, and not come back. On this particular day, I was working alone in the small store, and this one guy in his mid-20s came in. Normally, this guy got a pint of cheap whiskey and that was it, but that day he got a few singles. An hour later, he came back and asked for 2 more. Another hour later, and he's back asking for just 1 more. But this time he stops in the bathroom before he leaves. He comes out and tells me that he dropped the shot in the toilet, so he threw it away and wanted to buy a replacement. I played along but went to check the bathroom after he left. Either he was lying and I needed to be sure, or he just left a full shot of cheap whiskey in the trash where any random kid could pick it up. Surprise, no booze. So I text my manager and tell her everything, and she says to cut him off, of course, and to let her know if anything else happens. He came back and tried to get me to sell him another shot, and I told him no. He left and came back again, same situation. He kept repeating this. Eventually, he started threatening my job by claiming he knew my manager well enough to get me fired. He was starting to scare me at this point, so I gave him my manager's card. She ran a side business, fixing cell phone screens, and told him to call her. He got this smug look on his face, like he was sure she would side with him. He sat in his car for a bit, talking with her, and then just drove away. In all, this guy came back 11 different times trying to get me to sell to him again. A few weeks later, he ended up crashing his truck into a fire hydrant, getting arrested for fleeing the scene, and his wife divorced him and took their 3 kids, and the keys to every single car they both owned. He went to live with his mom in another state. His father was my coworker, and it sounded like he was trying to work on getting sober finally. But I haven't worked there in years, so I have no idea where he's at now. Story 41. I'm a nurse at a psych hospital, and this lady was going nuts, yelling and screaming at everyone, belittling us staff, refusing meds, all of it. When she came up to me during MedPass, she asked what she was getting, and I told her. She got furious and said, "You know what? I don't know why I even bother. I don't need to be here or any of these meds. I know what you're giving me, and I don't need any of it. I'm a doctor." To which I responded, "Yeah, not at this hospital." Then she stormed off. Didn't actually care to check if she was an actual doctor or not, but was proud of my response. Story 42. One of the fondest memories from my childhood. My schoolyard had designated areas where we weren't allowed to go during break times, recess, including the steps that led to the front door and a space of about 2 feet in every direction around them. There were 3 other massive step areas we could play in. No idea what the logic was. The forbidden area was color-coded, and we all knew not to go on the red-painted bits. Sometimes we'd try to shove each other onto the red areas, just to get each other in trouble. This tiny little kid wanders onto the red area. The teacher, who was on yard duty, whom I knew and hated, ran over to him, screaming at him to get off the red area the entire time she was running. You'd think the poor little lad had stepped into a nuclear reactor the way this power-hungry woman was hollering. Every kid within earshot stopped and stared. Then she grabbed the boy by the shoulder and spun him around, still yelling. "What year are you in? Who's your teacher?" This was in the 90s, so teachers still sometimes got away with laying hands on a child. The boy started crying, bawling. She kept yelling into his face, asking who his form teacher was. Then another teacher appeared and stared at her and said, "That's my son. He's 3. She was on a day off and had dropped in with her son to collect something and had turned her back to talk to another kid. I still remember the yelling, power-hungry teacher trying to do a hollow little laugh about how he looked like such a mature lad and his trousers were so like our uniform trousers, aren't they? So similar. Can you believe how similar they are? While his mother stared her out, and then she tried to suck up to the crying child. "Will you be coming here in a couple of years? Will you be coming to Mummy's school? Won't it be nice to be at school with Mummy?" While Mummy gave her a look that said, "Not if you work here, he won't." I think it was the first time I saw an adult faced with consequences for how they treated a child. Story 43. I was 18, maybe 19, living in a trailer I'd bought for my mom's parents. I was delivering pizza for Domino's, and me and the assistant manager had the weekend off, so after our lunch shift, we hit the river with her brother and her roommate, and then partied at their place, where I crashed. Saturday was a repeat of Friday, and Sunday was also. I came dragging home about 9 a.m. Monday morning to get ready for my 10 a.m. class, and my dad comes knocking. He goes on about how I can't spend all weekend partying like that, and I need to be more responsible and whatnot. So I just handed him my electric bill, which was in the sorter I put bills in by the door, and told him, "I need you to go pay this for me," and handed it to him. He looks at it. "I ain't paying your bill." "No, you don't, and that means you don't tell me what to do. Your advice is welcome, but not your orders." Or something like that. This was over 30 years ago. Story 44. I was working at Macy's, I'm 20 years old, and this happened on my last day there after submitting a 2 weeks notice. For context, I worked behind the men's fragrance section. This was around 1987-88. A woman and her 2 daughters showed up wanting to return a ton of items from the bedding section of the store. They had 3 king comforters, several pillows, and quite a few sheet sets. I told them that there was no way for me to return them from my counter, as the scanner would not reach the larger items and I would have to clear a very well-decorated counter. I was very nice and they seemed to understand. The department they should have been in was just 2 floors up and the elevator was just 10-15 feet away. They acted like they were fine with that option and left. Well, apparently they were pretty angry. The store director was working that day and marched up to my counter to reprimand me. She told me that would be my last day on the job if I screwed up again and she would terminate me on the spot. I leaned in towards her from behind the counter and told her, "Do what you need to do, Patty. In case you didn't know, this is my last day here anyway. If you fire me now, on a Sunday, you'll have to somehow produce my final paycheck." She just stared at me for a minute and steamed off. I won against that witch at a young age. What's crazy is I ran into her about 15 years later in an elevator of a major technology corporation. I was visiting that day for a meeting. The company she worked for leased a floor in the building. I was looking super sharp, and when she walked on, I recognized her immediately. I said, "Good morning, Patty. Great to see you again," all said in deadpan, followed with a knowing grin. She tried to act like she didn't know who I was, but I know she probably figured it out. I saw her in the parking garage at lunch, and she was in the back seat of a car with other people, and I saw her witchy poo finger pointing at me as they drive by. Story 45. I worked front desk at a kids after-school program. Part of my job was making sure only authorized people were picking up kids, aka keeping them safe. There were obviously parents and guardians I saw pretty much every day, so after I met them a few times, I didn't need to ask for their ID to confirm. But there would always be a handful of uncles, or neighbors, friends, moms, / new step-parents that would come in that I wouldn't recognize, and then I would check their ID against that kid's authorized list. One day, this fancy suit guy comes in to pick up a kid. I didn't recognize him, so I asked for his ID. He was absolutely livid. He huffed and puffed and, "Don't you know who I am, Ed?" and insisted he was always picking up his kid and, "How dare you, I'm his father." As an aside, some basic safety policies. A, doesn't matter how many times you tell me you're his dad, you still have to show me your ID. B, just because you may be his dad, that doesn't mean you're allowed to pick him up. This was unfortunately not an uncommon situation, where one parent had sole custody and the non-custodial parent would try to see the kids at the program. Anyway, Mr. Don't You Know Who I Am is irate and says it's illegal for me to keep his son from him and he's going to call the police. And I said, "Okay, please do." So he does. A few minutes later, an officer shows up and he gives him the whole story. And the officer says, "Okay, can I see some ID?" Incredible. I'm so happy right now. Couldn't possibly get better. The guy says, "I don't have it on me." Cop says, "Did you drive here, sir?" Guy says, "Yes." Cop says, "So you drove here without your license?" Somehow it got better. What a banner day. Anyway, in addition to being inconvenienced by me, he also wasn't allowed to drive away even without his kid until his wife came and brought him his ID, because the cop told him he would ticket him if he drove away without it. Called the cops on himself. What a wonderful day in the life of an underpaid customer service worker. Story 46. I had to call a ceasefire on a shooting range in the Army once. The staff sergeant, E6, heretofore known as the offender, firing on the range in front of me, had a jam of some type. In the offender's attempts to fix it, they flipped the gun so it was pointing away from the range and towards the spectators and me, the reason for my call of ceasefire. Anyway, the offender ignored me and kept ducking with their gun. I shouted at them to put down their ducking gun and repeated ceasefire. After they finally listened, they started craning me out for cursing at them and disrespecting an NCO, and listed the ways I would be punished. By this time, the range officer had made it to us and caught a part of the tirade. He quieted the offender down and asked me why I called ceasefire. After I explained, he pulled the offender aside, put them at attention, and had what looked like a very stern conversation. As they came back, I heard him saying that he would be following up with me later. He then told me I did the right thing and to disregard everything the offender had said. Finally finishing up with an announcement to the range participants at large that safety was everyone's top priority and that anyone could and should stop the range if they see something unsafe, no matter the rank. Story 47. I'm an academic. I had been working with a local company to give them some advice on data analysis they were doing. I was doing this pro bono because my university has a policy of supporting local organizations when we can, and also because my contact there was someone I knew from my hometown. It was only about 15 to 30 minutes of my time a week. The company got taken over by a bully and complete git, and my friend ended up leaving because of the toxic culture. A month or so later, I got an email from the new boss. He told me that I would be expected to conduct the full analysis in lieu of their former employee, in excess of 20 hours a week worth of work, and that he was expecting this to be done immediately, or he would be firing me from the company. I replied, pointing out some key points to him, namely that I didn't work for the company. I had been providing advice on an informal basis and was under no obligation to continue to do so, and that if he wanted my assistance, they could pay my university the standard consultancy rate. He railed against this initially and threatened legal action, at which point I introduced him to our law department because, not only do we have our own lawyers, we are also the place that train lawyers. He went silent after that. Story 48. My regional manager said something inappropriate to me at a business meeting in front of a lot of people, and instead of apologizing and moving past it, he kept doubling down and trying to find ways to get me terminated. This went on for a year and a half. He lived in the South, and I lived in the Northeast. He had to get creative to take shots at me. One day, he asked me to forward him my schedule for the week. He wasn't coming to ride with me, so this was a big red flag. I thought about it and suspected he was going to see one of my clients. I owned my territory and accounts and do something bad. I thought about it a bit more, trying to figure out which of my accounts was valuable enough with an untrustworthy point person. Once I figured that out, I contacted the customer service rep assigned to my accounts and casually asked her when Scott was going to visit Northeast High School. CSR gladly helped me out and told me. I showed up early on the specified date and time and went to see my account point person. He was surprised because, he didn't think I would be there that day. Then my manager showed up. The look on his face was priceless. We sat down with the point person, school principal, the real decision maker, and had a nice conversation about the quality of the product and my service to the school. It was nothing but compliments and praise from the point person and principal. My manager was so angry that his plan had been thwarted. He kept trying to get them to say something negative or complain about me. They eventually ended the meeting, and he walked out red as a tomato, mumbling, "I thought you were going to be somewhere else today." In the parking lot, both of us reached for our phones to call the VP of sales. We both spoke with the VP, and my manager was removed from working with me and not so gently forced towards retirement. I was assigned a new manager with a delightful personality. Story 49, my ex-copper of a neighbor still seems to think he has a badge and opened my front door and walked right into my property without permission. I very quickly brought him back to reality and the outside of my property. After a polite warning, it's safe to say he knows he has no power here. Story 50. My K-9 search team was tasked with clearing an area that was a suspected body dump site in a small-scale rural substances turf war. We get to the spot in the desert, and there's an RV parked right smack in the middle of our search area. We politely explain what's going on and ask the guy to move his camper a little ways down the road. He refuses and says he knows his rights, and we can't make him move. I agree with him. We can't force him to leave. He looks smug. Then I explain that his RV is now part of a suspected crime scene, and since we don't do that kind of search, we can ask the deputy to have it impounded and searched by the crime scene techs who will get to it when they get to it. Meanwhile, my team is circling the camper with crime scene tape and discussing things like subpoenas and civil forfeiture. He asked if it was okay to just move a little ways down the road, and we pointed him to a really pretty spot. Story 51. Military here. Years ago, I worked in a super low-tempo office environment. My team was generally able to get our assigned work done in just a few hours, and our supervision was cool with us goofing around for the remaining time in our shift as long as we didn't get too loud or unprofessional. We also got treated like grown adults, even at low ranks, and were typically trusted more as junior airmen than a lot of other people I know. Well, eventually we ended up getting a new lieutenant that was prior enlisted Navy and a total hard-ass. Rank was all that mattered to him, and junior enlisted like us were barely human in his worldview. He would constantly task us with meaningless busy work just because he didn't like to see us sitting around during downtime. Our sect had been in the military for a long time, longer than the new LT had been, and was on the verge of getting forced out for not being able to promote to the next rank up. But honestly, he was well past the point of caring. He was ready to be done. So when the LT came along and told him to order us to do a particularly dumb task and waste our time, he outright refused the order. The LT kept insisting and eventually started yelling at him for disobeying a direct order, but he stood his ground. Eventually, the LT screamed, "Well, shit! It sounds to me like you don't want to be in the Air Force anymore." Without missing a beat, our SOG yelled back, "You're right. I don't want to be in the Air Force anymore, sir." Loti didn't know how to respond to that and stormed off to his office. It never came up again, and we never got told to do the task the LT had wanted us to do. The SGG didn't make rank his last chance to do so and got forced out a few months later. I hope he's doing all right. He may not have been able to promote, but he was a damn good NCO in my book. Story 52. Years ago, when I was in the Army, I was drunkenly catching a taxi from the city back to my barracks. It was normally a $50 fare back then, because my barracks was a long way from the city. But it was also a fairly quick trip because most of that distance was via a motorway. Anyway, I must have dozed off because I awoke in some suburbs that were definitely not a motorway and definitely not on my trip home. It took me a few minutes to figure out where I really was, which was still a long way from my barracks, and the meter was already at $50. I asked the driver why we were in this suburb, and he told me, "Don't worry, this way is much quicker." I kept my mouth shut and let him continue the journey. When we got to the front gate of the barracks, the fare was $90. I handed him a $50 note and told him to be grateful I even paid him at all. He started yelling at me, but I got out of the taxi and walked through the gate. I flashed my ID on the way through and told the guard on duty, "Do not let that man through under any circumstances." I heard later on that the taxi driver had refused to move his car from the entrance, so the guy on duty called the local police, who turned up and told him to leave or he would be arrested. Story 53. Some random lady from down the street complained about me wasting water while I was out in my front yard watering plants. So I sprayed her with the hose. Her husband came up the street and had something to say to me about it. I don't even remember what it was. I just remember he was mad. I sprayed him with the hose, too. It didn't escalate past that. He just ended up going home all wet. Story 54. A million years ago, I had a property management company try to charge me for damages to an apartment I was staying at during college. They were known to be shady, but they were also one of the only companies in town, so you pretty much had to deal with them to live in an apartment. They tried to say that I damaged the carpet so bad that they had to replace the carpet, which meant they would keep the security deposit and charge a $400 replacement fee. I took pictures of the entire apartment before moving in and took pictures of the apartment 1 hour before returning the keys. I gave a USB with the photos and let them know I would be contacting a lawyer. They contacted me 2 days later to apologize for the misunderstanding and gave me back my security deposit. Then the actual owner of the property, who already paid for the replacement carpet, took me to court to get his money out of me. We went back and forth in court, but the only documents he brought with him was the work invoice and my lease. I brought my leases, photos, and threatening text messages and voicemails the owner sent me about the carpet and how he was going to teach me a lesson about money and how a judgment on your credit report will forever damage your ability to get loans or leases. Shady stuff like that. The judge didn't even take a moment to think about it and said there was no case here. I didn't do anything wrong and that both the management company and the owner owed me an apology. The owner left in a hurry and couldn't look at me on the way out or in the parking lot. He kept sending me invoices for that damn carpet for a few months after. And when I called the management company, I was informed they no longer manage properties for that person. Felt so good on that court day, like I won the World Cup. Story 55. I was actually the no person. I worked as a district manager for a movie rental company back in the 2005. We had a difficult customer at a small location in a very small town. Her complaining finally reached a point where I had called and invited her to meet me at the store. She was trying to bully my staff into breaking a membership rule and kept calling them dykes and lesbians. She came in like a Karen on steroids. First, she was surprised and I was a woman. She insisted she talk to my boss over the phone. I assured her it was me, as I repeated the entire conversation. With a huge huff sound, she proceeded to tell me how disrespectful my staff were and how bad the customer service was at this location. I asked to see her membership card, pointed out her benefits that gave her a promo movie a month. However, it could not be combined with a second discount using a coupon. She just stared at me for a couple of minutes before demanding an apology from the manager standing next to me. I simply said no. I never thought a face could be as red as hers. She slammed her membership card on the counter and was turning to leave when I told her she was the one that needed to apologize to my staff for calling them dykes and lesbians as they were straight. However, I was a good example of a dyke. You could have heard a pin drop. She stormed out, and my team started screaming and laughing. I got a huge hug from my manager. 2 months later, she called me to ask if she could have her membership back. You see, this was a very small town. No other means to rent movies, no movie theater within 40 miles. She got it back in the condition she followed the rules and respected my staff. Story 56. As a kid, I had a sleepover at a friend's house. We ate a bag of chips that we weren't supposed to eat. His dad said he would ground me. I forget exactly what I said, but it was along the lines of, "No, you won't," and he just walked away. I had already said I was sorry. I couldn't really do much else. Story 57. My company has a flexible vacation policy. Salary employees can take 2 weekdays off every 6 weekdays. Nobody does it that often, but having an extra day here and there to recharge is nice. Prior to that policy being implemented, we had a standard vacation policy, X years, Y weeks of vacation. But during open enrollment, there was an option to purchase up to 2 weeks additional time off. Since my family loves camping, I always opted in for extra vacation time, and they took the money from my checks for me to basically pay myself those 2 WK. About a year into the new flexible vacation policy, I get a new leader. He calls me one day to discuss my vacation requests. He sees that I've got 5 WKs already on the calendar. Then he tells me that he believes my seniority would align with only 3 WKs vacation, and I needed to make adjustments. So I reminded him that the company changed the vacation policy to better align with their new family-first work-life balance initiatives, and his opinions on how I use that policy are irrelevant to me. I also told him, while we're talking about where I should be in terms of seniority, I am long overdue for a raise. My salary is less than the salary minimum for my role, and as my leader, he needed to see about making that right instead of trying to take away the only reason I put up with the poor pay. He eventually got me that raise and never said another word about my vacation time. He was moved out of his leadership role shortly after that, and my current leader is one of the good ones. I take about 6 weeks off vacation now, with more mental health days than ever before, and my bosses are totally on with that. Story 58. Many times lifeguarding in the place I worked for many years, the state police was out backup. I lost count of the times when we had someone try and be aggressive or challenging to us, and we just called down the troopers. It always felt amazing, like Karen, do what I say or get ducked. One time had an illegally drinking patron sitting. Trooper was politely asking them to pack the drinks so we could put away for when they were done their beach time. Then we would give it back to them. We tried our best to be nice to the people. But this patron attempted to swing at the report. Then, the most amazing thing happened. They dodged the swing like they were superhuman, almost in slow motion looking at it. And in the next few milliseconds, had grabbed that patron's arm twisted back and flipped them over, with cuffs in hand to arrest. It was seriously something like 3 seconds from standing talking to patron flat on their back with officer putting cuffs on the person. Also, it was a female trooper, not the it matter, but I just wanted to point out that if you think a male trooper would be tougher, etc., and make you have a chance to get away from a female trooper, don't try. They are equally badass in every way possible. I vaguely believe they were ex-Navy or Marine or something, but it's been more than a decade, so I don't remember the details. Story 59. I had a manager when I worked retail who didn't give a crap about customer complaints. First instance, a customer asked me if we had a certain item out the back. We just had a fresh delivery, which I had already worked through, so knew we didn't have the item. She went off on a big tirade about how it was all lies and I was being lazy and didn't want to help her. She started stopping other random customers and telling them how useless I was, to the point she's having a full-blown tantrum. I just walked off at this point. She eventually finds another member of staff and demands to speak with my manager, who turns up and she starts going off again about me, finishing by saying how I was refusing to help her because I am lazy. He looked her deadpan and just said, "Nah, it's probably because you're," and walked back into his office. The other time I can remember, 10 minutes after closing time, a customer is banging on the locked front door, shouting through that she wants to speak to the manager, and she had a complaint. Turns out she had already spoken to him the day before, and when he dismissed her, she had gone home and written a complaint letter about him that she wanted him to post to the head office. He told her to go away, but she kept banging the door and eventually posted the letter through a gap under the door. He went over to it, picked it up, made sure she could see him, and ripped it in half and put it in the bin. He was only there for about 6 months, but honestly, it was the only time I could actually stand working retail. Story 60. My job had this one supervisor that everyone hated because she was a mean and spiteful person, but management never said anything because she was the only one who knew how to do her job. One day, she wanted time off, so management had her train me how to do her job. Cue, "You'll never do this job better than me" speech almost daily. When she went on vacation, I did her job just fine with no issues. In fact, all the people who worked under her vastly preferred working under me. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and we are in a supervisor meeting. The bad supervisor tries to throw me under the bus for a simple mistake I made during training, and management immediately calls her out on it, that she should take responsibility for not catching it while training. The meeting ended, and she left in a huff, mumbling about how we couldn't operate without her. She quit the next day, and I took over all her duties. I trained a new supervisor on how to do the job and made a simple reference sheet in case they had questions and I wasn't there. As soon as she didn't have leverage to be a bad person, she left. Even upper management was happy to see her go. Story 61. People don't seem to realize how much power flight attendants have. Name-calling is a level 1 threat. We will turn around, divert, and deplane you, and security will be waiting for you. Please don't make us do that, though. We just want to get to our layovers to rest. When we give you any instruction, it's not because we're trying to be a Karen. It's because we have to per the FAA. Story 62. I had a very, very rough relationship with my family, especially with my mother. She was very verbally and emotionally abusive towards me and my siblings growing up. During my last year of college, she began to throw me out for small disagreements that eventually led to me moving out entirely. I cried, I picked myself up and got 2 jobs and a new apartment. But I still loved my mom though, so when she reached out the day after Christmas to see me, I didn't turn her down. I drove down to see them and offered to take her and my sister to one of the fancier malls about a half hour away. While I was driving, and it was a route I was super familiar with, I missed my exit. No big deal, I could just reroute. My mother didn't agree, nor did my sister. They both demanded I pull over on the interstate, screaming and reaching at my steering wheel the entire time as I was sobbing because they had so little faith in me that they would have rather had us crash. Crazy. I didn't live in a great neighbor at the time, but I didn't mind it. My mother certainly thought it was scary though when I instead drove there and told them to get out. They were pleading for me to drive them home. No apologizes, I didn't. They got out and they were shaking and crying, walking away, while my dad was frantically calling me, asking where I dropped them off because no one bothered to remember the address I sent them. I've tried reconciling for a number of years. I've come to the conclusion they can't change, but now they have absolutely no hold over me. Story 63. A coworker of mine in tech sales was sitting in first class on the plane after a 4-day sales kickoff meeting in Vegas. It was a red-eye flight, and he made it a point to upgrade the week before, so he would be comfortable on an overnight cross-country flight. At the same time, one of our sales VPs got on the flight as a standby, which means for seats, you get what you get. She had a middle seat in coach and was pissed about it. As she walked through first class to go to her coach seat, she noticed my friend sipping a cocktail in his first class seat and asked him, "How is it that you are sitting here and I'm in coach?" He thought she was kidding and just laughed it off. A few minutes later, she makes her way back up to first class and demanded to the flight attendant that she switches seats with my peer because she's an executive and he works for her. The flight attendant kindly told her that it doesn't work that way, so our VP threw a tantrum and made a huge scene. The captain witnessed what was going on and called airport security to have her escorted off the plane. They eventually let her stay if she sat quietly in her middle seat in row 93, but not before they let her completely embarrass herself. The bonus was that the plane was full of coworkers because the destination was the city of our HQ. There were a few C-level executives who witnessed her meltdown, and she was formally reprimanded the next business day and was forced to apologize to my friend. I think she lasted 2-3 months at the company after that. Story 64. I worked as a waiter at a British restaurant in Seattle in the 1980s. I was a right-off-the-boat Englishman at the time. The owner, a real character called Nigel, also British, charged 25cc per glass of water on the grounds that he knocked 25cc off glasses of wine. His joint, his rules. I answered the telephone once, and this woman, a food critic for the Seattle newspaper, let off a torrent of abuse at me over the 25cc water charge she had paid the night before, ending with, "I'll never set foot in your restaurant again." Without thinking, I answered, "Well, madam, we very much look forward to never seeing you again." She included that retort in her negative review of the restaurant. The day the review was published, I came to work with some trepidation. What if Nigel fires me? "Are you the one who answered the food critic's call?" He asked me. Yes, sorry, Nigel." "Well, you ought to have told her that she's a ducking idiot." We all had a laugh, and sales never went down. Story 65. I was an assistant manager in a big store with 2 store managers in training who, even combined, still worked half-assed. Every few days, we needed to make an inventory order, but you have to do it before a certain time. Otherwise, they won't send an order or do an automatic order. Also, the system our stores ran on needed to be restarted for a new day so that the numbers were adequate. The guys were super slow in closing and doing the end-of-day work. When they didn't do BC, the end-of-day admin would make the browser, where they had to order, slower. They ordered and didn't, so it went out drinking. I started the day and the system crashed. Several times. I couldn't do crap, and at this point, we operated at a loss. I called them. They told me to fix it and went back to sleep off their hangover. So I called the district manager and told him, since I was a senior staff member, that I experienced this once, and it's the same thing BC, the end of day wasn't ran. And so the entire system, including orders and customers' payments, failed. Eventually, the 2 came in, and one guy, I gotten mad at BC. I had to manage this chaos, BC. He was drunk and stupid. He told me that he was my manager across the store for everyone to hear, and that I should show some respect. I told him, if you want me to take you serious as a manager, behave like one. Go home, in front of the staff and customers. I mean, risque, but a year after I became store manager. P.S. We lost like 5K this day. Story 66. As a young PFC in the Marine Corps, I was walking down a street one day when I heard a commotion on the other side of the street. There was an ensign, who looked even younger than me, trying to chew out a chief petty officer. I swear they looked like Odie and Garfield. The chief finally had enough and told the ensign, "Why don't you just shut up?" That poor ensign learned right there who runs the military, and it wasn't him. And then the chief looked across the street and asked me just what I was looking at. Story 67. The summer I was 15 and visiting my dad and wife number 3. He lived in Hawaii and mom was in California, so I only went during the summer. He slapped me in the face during an argument, then dragged me out to his van and locked the door, set the alarm, so he'd know if I got out. The next summer, when I was supposed to go see him, I refused. He called my mom, who he used to smack around while cheating on her with younger women, and told her to get me under control. She replied without missing a beat, "I don't control women, Ken. That's you, remember?" Haven't seen him since. Love my mom for that. I still brag about it 20 years later. Story 68. Enlisted flyer in the Air Force here. Military are required to blouse their pants. Little strap that tightens the pant cuff at the top of your boots, or you tuck into your boots. But with a flight suit, green one-piece, or a two-piece flight suit. Small differences, but it's the same camo pattern as Army and Air Force, with a slightly different cut and it's fire retardant. The cuff is worn over the boot for fire protection. However, the camo pattern is hard to distinguish the two-piece from a distance from the regular OCP uniform. Anyways, When I was pretty new, I was at a PX at a large Army base in the South where they conduct Army basic training and had to run in to grab something. Hard-charging Army chief comes barreling down the aisle at me while I'm in the crowded checkout line and starts trying to light me up with a knife hand for not having my pants bloused. I stay silent and I wait for him to stop blowing his gasket, at which point multiple people were looking over at the commotion. I go, "Sorry, Chief, but I'm in the Air Force and this is a flight suit. We don't blouse these," and turn around with my back partly toward him to continue in line. I could physically feel him staring at the back of my uniform and hears everyone around me start splackmanning until he storms off. Got a couple pats on the back after that and felt like I got away with murder. Story 69. Everything in this story happened in 2 days, 2020. Mom had COVID. All the hospitals in the city were full, and we couldn't get her hospitalized anywhere. She was at home. I bought an oxygen concentrator, and she laid with the concentrator connected half a day. She got worse, started breathing worse in the evening. We found a doctor who worked on call. He came home, checked Mom, and said that we have to hospitalize her immediately because hospitals have these higher grade oxygen support, and without that thing, she would die that night. Doctor left. Mom was laying in bed, breathing like one of these movies when someone gets their throat half cut. We were standing next to her, me, Dad, and brother. Couldn't do a single thing about it. Dad and brother went to other room, with tears down their faces and out of desperation. I was sitting in the corner of the room with my mom, and she barely whispered me to go to another room, and that if she would die in front of my eyes, it'd haunt me forever. I sat there and remember looking at her 4 hours. At some point, I went to sleep. Next morning, she got slightly better, and someone from the hospital called and said to bring her. They found a room for her. She spent a month in the hospital and fully recovered. Story 70. I'm an x-ray tech, and one afternoon I went to do an exam with the portable x-ray machine. When I got to the patient's room, they told me they were annoyed their brother was there and not sure why, since they purposely didn't put them as a person to contact in case of emergency. I noticed immediately that the brother had on a badge that showed he was a doctor within our health network. I sent him out of the room for me to do exams, but screen was visible from the hallway where he was. I had several images to take, and the millisecond the image popped up, I switched my screen so he couldn't see. When I was done, he asked to see him, and I told him no. His response was, "I've been in trouble for worse." I immediately responded that I'd just graduated, and the ink on license hadn't dried, and I wasn't willing to get in trouble for him. I grabbed my machine, turned around, and left him there, just speechless. I hope the patient heard me stand up to their brother for them. They didn't want him there, and I protected their privacy from him, despite his best efforts to hover over me. I told the story to a coworker, and she knew the doctor since he had been at our facility years before and was an a-hole. Don't go waving your doctor badge at me, even if we're part of the same healthcare company. You are not privy to my patient's information. Story 71. A few months ago, I had a possibly homeless, definitely down on his luck guy come into my pizza place, not mine, just a senior employee. He was about my age, early to mid-40s, and asked me to exchange a bunch of coins for a $20 bill. It's against store policy. We're not a bank, is what the owner has told us. I tell the guy, no, sorry, we can't open the till and make change like that. He kept asking and suggested he buy something to get the till open. I had politely told him no in 3 or 4 different ways when my younger female coworker walked into the kitchen from the back. He quietly said to me, "Wow, they hire them cuter and cuter these days." That was it for me. I'd had enough of this non-customer and told him, "No, that's not okay. You can leave now." He was confused and asked why. I told him, "I don't appreciate the comment you made about my teenage coworker and you can get out now." His eyes went wide, and he started profusely trying to say, "I didn't know she was a teenager. I'm sorry." At that point, I was like, "Dude, it's too late. You've made the comment, can't take it back. You can leave and don't bother coming back." She was actually 21, but like 4 or 5, petite. She's a badass and could have handled herself, but it was gross. And my Papa Bear side came out. Haven't seen him around since. Story 72. Used to hop between departments at my last job because my team and my supervisor were speed demons who just wanted to get crap done. Supervisor says Department 2 is backing up and asks if I could jump in for an hour to clear their production line. No problem, boss. I head over and begin quickly knocking out their backlog. Within 20 minutes, half of it is gone. That's when one of the team leads there decides to start giving orders, telling me I need to stay there for the next 2 hours until the items are finished and reported. I laugh as I walk back to my department. Team lead decides to follow me and reprimand me in front of my supervisor. He starts laughing too, tells the team lead that we are under no obligation to help, as their department quotas are up to them to meet, pulls the rest of my department that we had helping them. 4 hours of OT for them, because a middle manager in training couldn't stop running their mouth. I still keep in contact with my old supervisor. Learned a lot about not taking crap and trusting my work from that guy. Story 73. I used to manage a betting shop. I was young, 20. If any of the customers would complain, I'd have a look at an issue and see what I could do. I was reasonable. One day I was in a shop as the manager. The regular manager, Wayne, was working, but only as a cashier that day as he had to leave early, and I'd cover the rest of the shift on my own. A customer came up to the counter to claim a win on a greyhound race. His slip said trap 2. He was trying to argue it was a 5, not a 2. I said, okay, benefit of the doubt. When Wayne comes back from lunch, I won't say a word. You come up and give him the slip. If he thinks it's a 5, not a 2, then I'll pay you out. Wayne gets back from lunch, looks at the slip. It's trap 2, chucks it in the bin. Customer was going to kick off to Wayne. He says, I'll get the manager now. I step over and say on the wall to the left, what does that poster say? Customer, rules of the shop. Me, what is rule number 1? Customer, all bets are paid at manager's discretion, Wayne. And if you're confused, just read rule 1 again. It was glorious. Story 74. Ooh, it was me. I did it. Got an unconditional offer from my university after passing a scholarship exam. Was excitedly discussing it with my friend in chemistry class when should have been paying attention. Teacher shouts, Reverend Malarick, what makes you think you don't need to pass these exams? My friend starts saying, please, can I? I say, no, I got this, and stand up. This morning, I got an unconditional offer and a scholarship from my university. I don't need to pass these exams. Felt good. Story 75. Our job is computer certification for the government. A producer tries to push his half-baked, sloppy system that doesn't even have the minimum legal requirement. On his third try, we receive a letter from a high-level politician, leader of half the country, saying that the colleague who rejected the guy 3 times was incompetent and should be fired. My boss just had one answer wrapped in bureaucratobabble. No, we are federal. It means GTFO. The coworker has been promoted. My boss, who created the certification process, took the guy and told him step by step what he must drop and what he must create until it was just good enough to be certified. He never sold one of his bugged system. Story 76. On the last day of secondary school, we were told to come collect our exam results slip and yearbook photo. We were informed many days before it was compulsory to bring $10 to pay for that one piece of 4-hour photo. Come that day, I arrived with no $10 and was denied my results of slip, basically trying to extort me. The Karen vice principal came over to me and gave me a long spiel about behavior, not following rules, and threatened to withhold my results slip until I fork out the $10. Being the rebellious teenager, I just snatched my slip off her hand and told her to keep the photo. It was glorious to see her stand there, seething, mad, and speechless. There was absolutely nothing she could do except maybe fight a 16-year-old over a piece of paper that belonged to him anyway. The best she could muster was to scream at me to get out of the school, to which I shrugged and said, I'm leaving anyways. Story 77. In middle school, 8th graders got to go on a trip to 6 Flags at the end of the year. I got expelled in 8th grade. Around the time this trip, I was also dating another 8th grader who was suspended from school, so neither of us were allowed to go on the field trip. However, my dad really likes arcades, rip. So he took us and the rest of my family, I think some of my ex's brothers too, to 6 Flags the same day. The vice principal saw my ex and I with our friends from school and threw a ducking fit. He was so red in the face from screaming about how we can't be here, hand my ex by the shoulder, yelling about how he's calling the police. My dad was nearby and he just casually walked over to tell him, they're with me. I don't remember if the VP said anything, but it ended there and he just walked away. Story 78. My parents' house has a wood stove in the basement. Every year, my dad and I would split wood and load the basement up to help heat the house during the winter. This was so effective that we didn't end up using a lot of gas to heat the house. One year, when I was a young teen, the gas company sent my dad a bill for not using enough gas. The ensuing phone call was one of the most profanity-laced ass-chewings I had ever heard my entire life. The call concluded when the representative said they would send someone over to make sure that we were not tampering with the meter. When the field rep finally showed up, he just knocked on the front door and apologized for how the company had attempted to swindle my parents, that he was embarrassed to even be out at their place and that he wasn't going to even check to meter because he could see the smoke coming out of the chimney. He sent in a report that everything was on the level, and they never tried to pull that crap with my parents again. Story 79. I was a summer camp counselor. Remember that meme of the kid going, "You're disrespecting a future U.S. Army soldier"? A lot of young boys are like that. They brag about being in the military even though they're 14. One day, this bully kid is terrorizing another kid only because he said his dad was in the National Guard. This bully thought he had to cause a scene because someone else's dad actually is a soldier, but this preteen felt like he was tougher than him. I'm about to step in to break it up, but another dads in the group shouts, "Sit your ass down and leave that kid alone." The bully shudders. He gets red in the face. You think the National Guard aren't real military? Like they weren't in Afghanistan? Because I was. And if it weren't for the National Guard medics stationed there, I would have had to watch my friend die. The bully never spoke up again. Story 80. I worked in an independent bookstore in a liberal part of town in a liberal state. We bought and sold used books, so anything being brought in as far as political books was generally liberal, and most of the demand in the area was for the same. We had a large display window in front where we would put all kinds of popular books. There was an art fair on the street outside for a week, and a lot of the artists travel, so are not local. I am working one day, and this one artist comes in to complain that all of the display books that were political were left leaning. I explained the neighborhood, and that was what sold there. He claimed we were censoring other views. I said that we had plenty of books in the store that had messages I disagreed with. He asked me to name one, and I said the Bible. The look on his face was priceless. Story 81. A former boss had been an MP in the Army. There was a war game going on, and he, private corporal, had been assigned as security at a door that led to one of the war game rooms. Anyone who lacked a blue band on their right arm was to be denied entry. An officer, Cole, May tried to enter, and he told the officer he was not allowed entry as he lacked the band. The officer began yelling about his rank and the need to obey orders and step aside. My boss said, "Sir, you are mistaking your rank for my authority." It was about this point that a general stepped out of the war room to see what the yelling was about, then lectured the officer for yelling at my boss for doing his job. He told the office to get a band, otherwise he wouldn't be allowed entry. When the officer returned with the band, my boss simply said, "Sir," and opened the door for him. Story 82. I worked with a couple of guys that did bankruptcy liquidations. They basically bought the assets and sold them for whatever they could get. They had a thriving chain of other stores, and I feel like they did this sort of stuff. For fun? They were crazy talented at making money and reading trends. The store they were liquidating had a very generous return policy and had an incredible base of Karen customers that would bring all sorts of stuff back and get all sorts of store credit. When the place went tits up, all those Karens were surprised Pikachu that none of their store credits would apply to the liquidation sale. I had the pleasure of watching the bosses tell Karens to GDFO several times. They would argue, and the one guy would be standing stoically with his cigar until he had enough, and he would say, "You can get out now." Story 83. I was on vacation with my son, 13 and daughter 9, and we had stopped at my mom's house for a couple days. The first day, right after we arrived and I'm unloading, she crosses her arms and literally taps one foot, and with a raised eyebrow says to me, "It sure looks like you have enough energy. I wonder what could have you so amped up," clearly implying met use, almost an accusation. So I, after probably a pot of high-rev coffee from truck stops, some no-dos, and several hours in the car with 2 kids, stopped what I was doing and gave her my full attention. When she didn't elaborate, I told her, "I'm not high, but if I was, what are you gonna do about it? I'm on my paid vacation from my job. I live 4 hours away and I just loaned you a couple hundu, so?" She's never made any of her snotty implications since then, and it's been awesome. She did, however, inflict me with cockroaches about 5 years ago, and I'm still fighting those gross little duckers. Thanks, Mom. Story 84. I am rather fond of spontaneously creating my own policies that frustrate others' idiotic policies. For example, several months ago, I had a fiber optic line installed at my house. The installers tucked it into the space between the grass and sidewalk rather than burying, where it was inevitably cut by a lawn crew and then replaced properly. A while later, I got a call from some collections outfit. "Hello, we are calling to collect $350 from you for repairing the fiber line. Sorry, but it was improperly installed, so the damage is on you. Our policy is that the homeowner is responsible for damage on their property." Interesting. Unfortunately, our policy says we can't pay for damage to improperly installed fiber line. "Sir, I cannot make an exception to our policy. You need to pay." Well, we're at an impasse then because I cannot make an exception to our policy and it says I can't pay you. This went on for a while, then they gave up. Story 85. One of my best friends. He's a highly specialized nuclear safety engineer. When these guys write documentation or safety plans describing how to safely treat, store, or dispose of relevant material, they do lots of peer review. One of his peers, let's call him Gitface, was notorious for arguing and marking up everyone's crap to no end, and my boy had just about had enough of it. So he writes up a whole load of rebuttal arguments about why Gitface's notes are wrong. At the next meeting, it gets brought up and Gitface says something to the effect of, "If you check the documentation in the XYZ papers, I think you'll find you're wrong." My boy is a super laid-back farm boy and is just about completely unflappable. He just looks at dude and goes, "Yeah, I don't need to read the documentation. I know exactly what it says. If you turn to the title page, I think you'll find that I wrote it." Story 86. I work at a funeral home. Our staff and clients are predominantly Caucasian. There are very often more Caucasian homes and then many funeral homes that cater to more African American families, much like churches. Oftentimes, some members of the African American community do not like how the Caucasian funeral homes tend to do cosmetics on the African American bodies. We were having a funeral for an African American family's young baby who sadly passed. A funeral goer comes up to the director in charge and just put us on blast for how awful the baby looked and how we don't understand how to do African American makeup. The director took it in like a professional, and when she was done, he just calmly stated, "Ma'am, the baby's mother chose to do the makeup herself." It ended the conversation. Story 87. This is a friend's story from when he was in the Army. He loved all the equipment and just learning how to use it all. He was also a real goofball who has loads of stories not specifically relevant here. But getting back on track, he made it to specialist, but refused promotions to corporal because A, he didn't intend to do a full career, and B, it's more responsibility for the same amount of money. Anyways, there was some piece of equipment he knew how to use quite well that he technically was not supposed to be in charge of because of his rank. They got some new LT who pulled him off of it because of this. "Sarge Day, get the guy who's supposed to be using this." "Yes, sir," he replied as he grabbed my friend and put him right back in front of it. Story 88. Son, 17, popped his head in the kitchen and said that he needed me, his manager, at the register. I walked with them to his register and he introduced me as H, the manager, to the customer. Before I could speak, Son said to me they wanted to talk to the manager because they knew the owner and she always gave them a discount. I explained that the owner was in the back. Son walked off super fast to get the owner. I assured the customers that she would be right out. Son then walked out with the owner. He introduced the owner to her dear friends. How did he do that without laughing? They even tried to argue with me that I wasn't the real owner and that we were mean for pulling that trick. Son threatened to ban them for lying. Some moments were worth all the bullshit. Story 89. Several years ago, we were at a family gathering at my husband's parents' home. We were all gathered in the living room. My brother-in-law started talking about what a loser my adult son was. I told him that it was not okay to call him names, and that if he had something he wanted to talk about, we could talk about it without name-calling. He got really close to my face and wagged his finger at me and shouted to shut the fuck up. My response was, "Or what? Are you gonna hit me?" Because I felt like he was trying to physically intimidate me. That was about 14 years ago, and he still avoids me. Story 90. One of the times I came home from the service, had some extended family start crying about women in the military. Note that my parents, uncles, aunts never served, but their parents did. When I overheard them, the careening get to a pitch, I used my instructor voice, saying something to the effect of, "How the duck do y'all anything about military service? When y'all never put your name on the dotted line on, I don't want to hear anything until I see your service records." That got them to be quiet about it for a couple months. Story 91. I was working at a Wall Street firm once, and we had to evacuate the building due to a fire alarm. One of the firm's partners was in the middle of a deal and was anxious to get back into the building. After a while, no longer having any patience, the partner goes to the fire chief and says, "Do you know who I am?" "No, sir, I do not. I'm a partner at this firm, so technically, I own this building, and I am ordering everyone back into the building." The fire chief looks at this guy and then says, "In a fire situation, I own this building, so you're just gonna have to wait." Totally owned. I was happy to be there when that happened. Story 92. My dad is a priest, Episcopalian. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone. This guy wanted to date me and didn't take it well when I turned him down. Started making threats before hitting me with, "Go on a date with me or I'll tell your dad you dated a woman last year." How would that look for the priest's daughter? This man really thought he had something. I looked at him like the idiot he was before pointing at the Episcopal Church Welcomes You sticker in my dad's office window. I'd been out as bi to my family for years at that point, and my dad is an ally. Story 93. Well, my favorite is when some whole tailgates me. "Hey, Git, I'm in the power position here, and you can't do anything about it but screech and make yourself all upset. I've got nothing better to do, and pissing off a holes is amusing to me. So I think I'm now going to drive just slow enough to drive you insane. Yeah, I'm probably going to be killed by a road rager, but in the meantime, I'm having fun." Story 94. I owned part of a car wash for a couple of years, do not recommend, and margins were tight. By tight, I mean I lost my shorts. Being good at business does not make one good at a specific business, but I digress. I could only be there a couple of times a week, but my position was that my business meant my labor. I would regularly work the line, wearing the same jumpsuits as anyone else. I had some glorious interactions. My favorite was telling the sheriff's wife that while we washed county patrols for free, hers was not one of them. Usual reverse Uno chain of escalation followed. Story 95. Dude, who gave me absolute crap for not answering his question the way he wanted, complimented my boss on how quick he did the repair. "Yeah, I read the book a few minutes ago," was my boss's reply. Story 96. I was in the psych ward. I met a patient who believed he was getting let go that day. His doctor approached him in front of everyone and told him he would be there for another 4 months. I've never seen someone struggle so hard to keep a lid on their reaction. One wrong word or move and that stay could have become much longer. Story 97. Toward the end of meeting, a coworker would often say to our boss, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" as the boss was about to leave the room, as if to say something in confidence, as the rest of us left the room. This was a power play to keep us guessing what conversation was about. Story 98. Had a religious boss who was also quite demanding. He went on and on one day about how I needed to complete some task on the weekend. I smiled at him and said firmly, "I do not work on the Sabbath as the Bible ordains." Needless to say, he was mad, but had to relent that I could finish it Monday. Story 99. In high school, I hated this bully named Nick. He treated the kids with mental and physical handicaps like utter crap, so I hated his ass. I've always been sweet, but I was mean as a snake to him, and I even spread rumors about him. One day he said, "You better stop or I'll make your life a living hell." I burst out laughing. He couldn't comprehend that I could give a duck what he and his popular friends thought of me. They couldn't touch me because I knew who I was. He still hates me. Story 100. I used to work at a library. Once, after I'd been there long enough to gain some confidence in enforcing the rules, a patron came in with a DVD case that he'd busted open with a screwdriver. I told him the managers had said he'd get banned if he ever did that again, and he started to bang on the counter and scream at me. So my manager called security and had him escorted to the sidewalk outside. Stupid games, stupid prizes. I did have somebody walk me to my car that afternoon, though.